Imagine staring down a mandatory, like 50% increase in your daily workload over the next 5 years.
Right, and without any extra pay, obviously.
Exactly. Zero pay. You know it's coming. You know it will probably cost you hundreds of dollars a month out of your own pocket.
Minimum.
Yeah, minimum. You know it's going to drain your savings, jeopardize your career, and just generally push your mental health to the absolute breaking point.
It's a terrifying prospect.
It really is. Now imagine that instead of preparing for this completely inevitable reality, millions of people are simply checking a mental box that says, opt out.
Which is just wild to think about.
Right. Today, we are looking at a demographic tidal wave that is coming for almost every single one of you listening right now.
Yeah, it's inescapable.
We are talking about the massive, society-altering shift in caregiving responsibilities. Millions of people are playing a really dangerous game of chicken with the healthcare system.
And honestly, the stakes could not be higher. It is the defining, quiet crisis of our generation.
A quiet crisis. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, because we are watching this slow-motion collision between a surging aging population, an increase in chronic illnesses, and a fundamental breakdown in who actually does the labor of care.
Who actually shows up and does the work.
Exactly. And what makes this so critical is that the traditional safety nets we all assume will catch us, well, they're already frayed beyond repair.
Which is why we're doing this deep dive today. And we are using Ontario as our lens because the numbers coming out of there right now are, well, they're a terrifyingly accurate preview of what is happening globally.
Yeah, it's a perfect microcosm.
Right. So to truly understand both the incoming crash and, the potential lifeboat, we are synthesizing two incredible sources today.
Very different sources, I should add.
Very different. The first is a rigorous 2024 spotlight report from the Ontario Caregiver Organization, the OCO.
Right.
They surveyed over 2,200 people to map out this massive gulf between our caregiving expectations and the really harsh reality.
And what sets this OCO methodology apart is who they actually talked to. They didn't just poll the people who are currently in the trenches.
Which is what you normally expect, right?
Exactly. But they specifically targeted prospective caregivers. So people who anticipate taking on the role in the next 5 years.
Okay.
And crucially, they surveyed a cohort of people who foresee the need arising, but are flat out refusing or, feeling entirely unable to do it.
The one saying no.
Right. It gives us a window into the psychology of avoidance.
Which is fascinating. And then, when state systems fail, history shows us that people inevitably turn to localized networks.
Always.
So to balance that harsh data, our second source is this culturally focused, deeply strategic framework that's circulating among community and faith leaders right now.
Right. It's titled The Coming Caregiving Wave.
Yes, the coming caregiving wave. And it views this impending deficit not just as a policy failure, but as a hidden opportunity for grassroots community intervention.
It is such a vital pairing. I mean, you cannot look at the OCO's unvarnished data without feeling just a profound sense of despair.
Oh, absolutely. It's bleak.
So the second source is the counterbalance. It provides a structural, non-governmental path forward for when the traditional avenues basically hit a dead end.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to grasp the sheer scale of the deficit, we really need to look at the raw math of this demographic cliff.
The math is staggering.
It is. The OCO report lays out a 5-year projection for Ontario alone. This is regarding people providing unpaid physical or emotional support to a family member, a partner, or a friend.
So the projection is a leap from 4 million current caregivers to 6.5 million.
Wait, 6.5 million?
Yeah, that is a 50% increase in half a decade.
Wow.
To put that in perspective, demographic shifts of that magnitude simply do not happen without causing major structural fractures in society.
I mean, you are talking about absorbing 2.5 million new people into a high-stress, high-labor, entirely unpaid workforce.
Exactly. Entirely unpaid.
But, the statistic that truly stopped me in my tracks isn't the 6.5 million who will do it. It's the shadow statistic.
And the opt-out.
Yes. Alongside them, there are another 2.7 million Ontarians who fully expect to face caregiving demands within that exact same 5-year window, but who have already decided they cannot or will not participate.
2.7 million people.
Yeah. The opt-out cohort.
Just standing on the precipice of a family health crisis and declaring their unavailability.
I have to push back on the very concept of this, though, because can you actually practically opt out?
That's a great question.
I mean, If your mother has a stroke or your spouse is diagnosed with early onset dementia, deciding you are going to opt out feels like standing on a train track and deciding you're just going to opt out of the train hitting you.
Right.
The train is still coming. The crisis doesn't just vanish because you cross your arms and say no.
What's fascinating here is the underlying psychology driving that refusal. The researchers really dug into the reasoning behind those 2.7 million people.
And what did they find? Because it sounds kind of callous at first.
It does, but it rarely stems from a lack of empathy or malice. It actually stems from a profound lack of confidence.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. These individuals are evaluating their own physical stamina, their mental resilience, and honestly, their bank accounts.
And realizing they just don't have it.
Exactly. They're concluding that they structurally cannot bear the weight. They are preemptively waving a white flag.
So they're looking at the math of their own lives. Like maybe they are already working 2 jobs, or maybe they have their own health issues.
Right.
And they realize there is just zero surplus energy or capital to give.
Precisely. But there is a secondary mechanism at play here, and it is arguably much more dangerous.
Okay, what's that?
Well, a vast portion of this opt-out cohort operates under the assumption that the healthcare system is a magical, all-encompassing net.
They think the government will just handle it.
Yes, they genuinely believe that if they step aside, a government agency, a hospital, or some social service will seamlessly step in to fill the void.
And you listening might be nodding along right now thinking, well, isn't that what taxes and universal health care are for? Doesn't the system handle the sick?
That is exactly the blind spot the data exposes.
Right. It's a huge misconception.
The source material is brutally clear on this point. Family caregivers currently provide 75% of the care within the healthcare system.
75%.
Yeah. The system is not designed to replace the family. The system is fundamentally subsidized by unpaid family labor.
Let's trace the actual mechanics of that just so we're clear. If someone has a major surgery, the hospital handles the acute phase, right?
Yes, the acute phase.
The surgeon operates, the nurses monitor the vitals, but then comes the discharge.
The dreaded discharge.
Right. The hospital doesn't send a full-time nurse home to administer the 10 different daily medications, puree the food, change the surgical dressings, or, help the patient to the bathroom at 3 a.m.
And this is the collision point. If 2.7 million people say, I'm not doing that post-discharge labor, let the hospital do it.
The hospital simply cannot.
No, the bed needs to be emptied for the next acute patient. The social workers are put in an impossible position trying to discharge a patient to a home where no one is willing to catch them.
It's terrifying.
The system relies on the family to be the ultimate shock absorber.
So the people opting out aren't handing the burden to a capable system. They're handing it to a system that requires their labor just to function at a baseline level.
Right. It is a catastrophic feedback loop.
Which naturally leads us to examine the other side of the coin. If millions are opting out, what about the people who are willing to step up?
The prospective caregivers.
Right. How are they preparing for this incoming reality?
Well, this brings us to what I think is the most frustrating part of the data. We have a profound preparation paradox.
The paradox. Okay, explain that.
The awareness is undeniably there. 94% of the prospective caregivers, the ones who know they will likely be called upon, they say it is very important to be prepared.
So almost everyone agrees this is a massive life event that requires planning.
Yes, they see the storm on the radar. They acknowledge its severity.
But then you look at the execution, more than half of those same people have taken zero action.
None. No plans. No savings.
And arguably the most baffling metric of all. 1 in 2 haven't even initiated a basic conversation with their loved ones about future care needs.
Yeah, the survey data points out that the primary barrier to having these conversations is that they are deemed too uncomfortable.
I really want to pause on that uncomfortable excuse.
Yeah.
Is it really just that talking about mobility or memory loss over Sunday dinner is socially awkward? Because avoiding a conversation that could prevent years of grueling crisis management, it feels less like minor discomfort and more like intense psychological self-preservation.
It is an active denial.
Exactly. Active denial.
It is absolutely a form of anticipatory denial. To sit down with a parent and ask, who is going to bathe you when you can no longer stand?
Oh, that's heavy.
It is. It forces both parties to confront mortality, vulnerability, and a total role reversal. It shatters the illusion of perpetual independence.
And when we look at the granular breakdown of what people are failing to plan for, you see how deep this denial actually runs.
Yeah, let's walk through those specific numbers because they map out exactly where the systemic failures are going to occur.
Okay, hit me with the stats.
According to the report, 47% haven't planned for their loved one's housing needs.
Almost half.
Right. 53% have done no planning regarding the sheer volume of time caregiving will require.
Wow.
And 54% have entirely ignored the impact this will have on their own immediate family life.
Okay, let's start with that housing number. 47% not planning for housing. That is a direct collision with society's absolute favorite healthcare buzz phrase.
Aging at home.
Aging at home.
Yeah.
Every politician touts it, every senior wants it, but aging at home without a plan isn't independence.
Not at all. It's a structural nightmare. It's not just about paying the mortgage,
No.
Planning for housing means recognizing that a standard residential home is architecturally hostile to a failing body.
Exactly. It's like trying to run a mini hospital ward out of a 1970s split level.
Right.
You are suddenly dealing with standard doorways that are 2 inches too narrow for a wheelchair.
Yeah.
You are looking at a master bathroom where just stepping over the lip of the bathtub becomes a daily, potentially fatal hazard.
It's so true.
Retrofitting a house with a $15,000 stair lift or tearing out a bathroom for a roll-in shower, that isn't something you can plan for on a Tuesday afternoon after a bad doctor's appointment.
No, it requires years of foresight.
Right. And because that foresight is lacking, aging at home often devolves into this scenario where the patient is just confined to a single room on the ground floor.
Entirely dependent on an untrained family member.
Who is acting as a pharmacist, an orderly, and a physical therapist, all without the benefit of shift changes or a medical supply closet.
And the OCO report confirms exactly how this lack of preparation plays out, because they actually surveyed the current caregivers too, the people currently living in those retrofitted living rooms.
And the retrospective data is brutal, isn't it?
It really is. 44% of current caregivers state they were entirely unprepared for the impact caregiving had on their lives.
Almost half.
Yeah. 38% were entirely blindsided by the sheer amount of time it consumed.
They're grieving the life they thought they were going to have while desperately trying to manage the life they are trapped in.
Exactly. Without planning for the housing, the time, or the boundaries, everything is an emergency. It consumes evenings, weekends, vacations.
Which brings us to the most tangible, hidden cost of all of this. It isn't just an emotional or temporal deficit. We really need to talk about the economics.
The financial side is rough.
It shatters the illusion that caregiving is just a matter of showing up with a good attitude. Caring for someone for free is shockingly expensive.
The out-of-pocket costs are perhaps the most sobering metric in the entire study.
Tell me about it.
Almost 3 in 5 current caregivers are using their own personal income to fund caregiving expenses.
And what are they actually buying? Because we aren't talking about luxury items here.
No.
We are talking about the daily mechanics of survival that universal healthcare or basic insurance just does not cover.
Right. Things like adult incontinence supplies, which run into the hundreds of dollars.
Specialized dietary foods, high-calorie nutritional shakes.
Gas money for shuttling back and forth to specialists 4 times a week.
Exorbitant hospital parking fees. Or even hiring a personal support worker out of pocket for just 3 hours so the caregiver can actually go to the dentist themselves.
And all of those unglamorous, totally necessary expenses add up to an average of $640 every single month.
Straight out of the caregiver's pocket.
Straight out of pocket.
$640 a month. I mean, for a lot of families, that is a car payment. That is a massive chunk of a mortgage.
Yeah, and that is merely the average. The report highlights that 5% of these caregivers are bleeding in excess of $2,000 a month.
$2,000 a month.
Every month. Now, contrast that staggering reality with the expectations of the prospective caregivers we discussed earlier.
The ones who aren't planning.
Exactly. The report shows that only 1 in 4 prospective caregivers believe they could afford even $500 a month.
Wait, so 75% of the people about to enter this workforce already know they cannot afford the baseline average cost of what is coming.
Exactly. They already know. And despite knowing they can't afford it, 50% of them have done absolutely zero financial planning to bridge that gap.
I am looking at this from the outside and wondering, What is the actual mechanism for survival here?
It's a good question.
If the bill is $640 a month and you know you don't have it and you aren't saving it, what is the plan when the pharmacy rings up the total?
Well, the survey explicitly asked them how they plan to cope, and the answers reveal reliance on incredibly desperate, destructive financial strategies.
What kind of strategies?
Well, 36% plan to ask other family members to help pay the bills.
Oh, wow. Anyone who has ever tried to split a massive, recurring, indefinite bill among siblings knows that is a recipe for absolute family warfare.
Definitely.
You were sitting on a Zoom call with 3 siblings trying to decide if mom really needs the expensive memory care day program, and suddenly 20 years of childhood resentment boils over.
Right. It assumes a level of familial harmony and shared liquid wealth that rarely exists in the real world.
It really does.
Moving down their list of strategies, 35% plan to cut back on their own personal spending.
Okay, so a direct drop in their own quality of life.
Exactly. Further isolating them from social activities or stress-relieving hobbies.
That's just going to accelerate burnout.
For sure. Then 32% plan to drain their own savings or investments.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they're cannibalizing their own retirement, basically ensuring that in 20 years they will become a financial burden to their own children.
It's a generational wealth wipeout.
And perhaps most alarmingly, 17% are fully willing to go into debt to float the cost.
17% planning to finance chronic illness with debt. That is a terrifying financial death spiral.
It really is.
Because a leaky roof is a one-time debt. $640 a month on a line of credit, stretching out for 7, 8, or 10 years of a dementia diagnosis, is totally unrecoverable.
Unrecoverable. And this financial strain bleeds directly out of the home and into the broader economy.
Right.
Which brings us to the workplace dynamics. The data regarding career impact is a massive red flag for the corporate world.
Yes, the expectations prospective caregivers have of their employers are wild.
Unrealistic, really.
71% expect their employer to be highly understanding of their role, and 62% expect flexible hours or dedicated work-from-home options specifically to manage their care duties.
On the surface, that sounds like a reasonable desire for an empathetic workplace. But what the report points out is that these expectations are significantly higher than the reality current caregivers actually experience.
Right now, a current caregiver might be quietly burning through all their sick days and vacation time just to sit in oncology waiting rooms.
Too afraid to tell HR because they need the job to pay the $600 monthly deficit.
Exactly. But the incoming wave of caregivers assumes their boss will just nod and smile when they need to log off at 2 p.m. every Tuesday and Thursday for the next 5 years.
It sets up an inevitable, massive clash between a workforce demanding unprecedented long-term accommodations and employers fundamentally driven by productivity and profit margins.
A company might easily accommodate one employee going through a short-term crisis.
Right.
But if 30% of a company's workforce suddenly requires extreme flexibility simultaneously because this demographic wave hits, the corporate infrastructure is not built to absorb that.
And when that clash happens, the employee usually loses.
Yeah.
If they are forced to step down to part-time or if they lose their job entirely, they lose their primary source of income right when their out-of-pocket expenses are skyrocketing. It is a perfect storm.
Which culminates in the ultimate toll of this entire crisis. We've talked about the structural deficit, the housing issues, the financial ruin.
All of it.
But all of these factors funnel into a singular, devastating outcome for the human condition, which is the psychological toll.
The burnout cliff.
Because despite all the denial about housing and finances, prospective caregivers are strangely clear-eyed about the emotional devastation.
Yes, 76% of them fully expect the role to be mentally and emotionally difficult.
They are anticipating the pain.
And the granular stressors identified in the data explain why. 80% stress over dealing with their loved one's declining health.
This isn't just sadness, though. It is a profound, daily anticipatory grief.
Yes.
You are mourning the loss of the person while they're still sitting right in front of you.
It's agonizing to watch someone's mind slip away or to see the strongest person you know lose the ability to feed themselves.
It breaks you.
Furthermore, 72% stress over the overall management of the situation, finding services, coordinating care.
That is the unpaid, part-time administrative job nobody tells you about.
Right.
Caregiving isn't just fluffing pillows, it's sitting on hold with a government agency for 3 hours.
It's fighting with an insurance adjuster over a claim denial.
It's coordinating a primary care doctor, a cardiologist, and a neurologist who literally refuse to share medical records with each other.
The administrative friction alone is enough to break a person.
Exactly, and 70% state they are terrified of managing their own emotions through the process. The guilt of losing your temper, the resentment of being trapped, the deep, isolating sadness.
And their fear is completely validated by the current reality. The OCO report states that 75% of current caregivers feel so burned out, they actively question if they can even continue.
Three-quarters of the people holding the healthcare system together are on the verge of walking away.
And the data shows burnout and depression rates among this group actively increased again in 2024. The trajectory is worsening.
So, what does this all mean? Let's zoom out and look at the terrifying mosaic we've just assembled.
Okay, let's look at the big picture.
We have a 50% demographic surge in demand. We have a healthcare system entirely reliant on family labor to function.
We have individuals facing hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in monthly out-of-pocket costs, largely unfunded and unplanned for.
We have a corporate world unprepared for the flexibility demands. And we have a mental health crisis where 75% of the current workforce is burned out.
The government cannot afford to hire 2.5 million nurses to fill the gap.
And the individual nuclear family is structurally and financially buckling under the pressure.
It is a complete systemic failure point. The state is too bureaucratic and underfunded to handle the volume, and the isolated individual is too resource depleted to survive it.
So if you can't rely on the state and you can't shoulder it entirely alone in your living room, what is actually left?
That's the big question.
This is where we transition to our second source, the coming caregiving wave, and the framework it offers is genuinely fascinating.
It really is. It pivots entirely away from waiting for a government policy fix and looks at the highly strategic, massively overlooked role of community and faith-based organizations.
This document challenges community leaders to reframe the entire situation. It acknowledges the quiet crisis, but it reframes it as a kingdom opportunity hiding in plain sight.
I love that phrasing because it flips the narrative from passive victimhood to active intervention.
It really does. It is a direct challenge to neighborhood associations, community centers, and especially churches to open their eyes and realize the most critical mission field isn't overseas, it is right down the street.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, grassroots community groups are historically structurally designed to bridge the exact gaps that macro-level governments cannot. The government agency can mail you a tax credit form for your caregiving expenses, but a government agency cannot sit with a lonely senior in their living room on a Tuesday afternoon so their exhausted daughter can go to the grocery store alone.
The source specifically identifies a blind spot within communities. It points out that there are hollowed-out, exhausted caregivers sitting silently in the pews of churches or in the folding chairs of community center meetings every single week.
They are completely isolated, totally unseen.
Mostly because our society hasn't conditioned us to recognize the slow attrition of caregiving as an acute crisis requiring intervention.
We have community playbooks for sudden, visible events,
Right.
If a family's house burns down, or if a couple has a new baby, the neighborhood mobilizes. Meal trains are organized, donations are collected.
But the slow, grinding, decade-long marathon of dementia care is virtually invisible to the community eye.
Now, the coming caregiving wave makes a very specific theological argument to its audience, and I want to relay this impartially so you listening can understand the exact framework these faith leaders are being asked to operate within.
Yeah, we're not endorsing it, just laying out their perspective.
Right. The document argues that caring for these families is not an optional peripheral charity project. It is framed as a fundamental discipleship issue, a core community responsibility rooted in biblical mandates.
It grounds its call to action in specific scriptural references to emphasize the obligation. It cites Mark chapter 12, verse 30, about loving with all your strength.
It points to Galatians chapter 6, verse 2, which commands followers to carry each other's burdens.
It references James chapter 1, verse 27, regarding looking after those in distress, and 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8, regarding the mandate to provide for one's relatives.
So the argument being presented to these faith communities is stark. You cannot legitimately claim to be living out these foundational values if you are watching the families in your own congregation drown under the weight of caregiving and doing nothing to intervene.
It elevates caregiving from a private family shame to a collective moral duty.
And what makes this framework so compelling is that it does not stop at high-minded theological theory. It immediately pivots to highly practical, granular, non-governmental solutions.
Real actionable stuff.
Exactly. These are steps that literally any community group, whether it is a church, a mosque, a secular neighborhood association, or a Rotary Club, can implement tomorrow.
Let's walk through these 5 steps, because this is where the actual hope resides in all this heavy data.
Let's do it.
Step 1 is simply to identify the caregivers early, create safe, dedicated spaces for people to actually share their roles without feeling like they are being a burden or just complaining.
Which directly attacks the isolation. Step 2 is to start the conversation. We saw in the OCO data that 50% of people refuse to talk about aging because it's uncomfortable.
But community leaders hold the microphone.
They do. They have the platform to normalize these discussions. If a community leader stands up in front of a crowd and says, we need to talk about advanced care planning and cognitive decline, it instantly removes the taboo.
It gives the congregation permission to speak about it.
Step 3 is to equip and prepare. Don't wait for the frantic midnight phone call when the crisis hits.
The document suggests hosting workshops with local legal experts on power of attorney or financial planners who understand elder care while the skies are still clear.
Prepare the community before the wave breaks over them.
Step 4 is to build supportive community. This means creating specific small groups or mentoring channels for caregivers.
It's about taking a veteran caregiver who has been navigating the healthcare bureaucracy for 5 years and pairing them with someone who just received a terrifying diagnosis for their spouse.
The transfer of lived experience is invaluable.
And then there is step 5, which is the absolute core of the entire strategy. Provide tangible help.
Provide tangible help. This is the operational mechanism. This is where theory becomes practice.
Exactly. The text explicitly calls for communities to mobilize around respite care, bringing meals, running errands, or simply providing presence.
It's a profound realization. We are so culturally conditioned to believe that fixing a healthcare crisis requires a multi-billion-dollar legislative package.
And yes, systemic funding is crucial.
Of course. But sometimes the most effective, immediate intervention in the world is just a neighbor dropping off a casserole, taking the car keys, and saying, go take a 2-hour nap. I will sit with your dad.
It is the micro-interventions that make the macro marathon survivable. A government policy takes 3 years to draft, debate, and implement.
Meanwhile, a neighborhood network can mobilize a meal train and a lawn mowing schedule by tomorrow morning.
It totally rescales the problem. It brings it down from an insurmountable, abstract, provincial demographic cliff and puts it right onto your street corner.
It makes it actionable.
And if we bring this all the way back to the beginning, it fundamentally redefines the opt-out phenomenon.
Those 2.7 million people who are planning to refuse caregiving are doing so because they are looking at their resources and seeing that they are entirely, utterly alone.
But if they knew they weren't alone,
That's the thing. If a prospective caregiver knew that their community center or their church was going to wrap around them, that someone else would navigate the insurance forms, that a rotation of neighbors would cut the grass and drop off dinners twice a week,
how many of those 2.7 million people might suddenly find the confidence to step back into the role?
that is the pivotal question. If you cure the isolation, do you cure the refusal?
Because currently, isolation isn't just a side effect of caregiving, it is the defining feature of the experience.
The source calls this the mission field at our doorstep. It challenges us to stop looking thousands of miles away for people in desperate need and to realize the crisis is unfolding silently behind the front doors of the people we wave to every single day.
We have covered immense ground today, tracking a deeply complex, systemic issue.
Yes, let's pull all of this together for you listening. We started with the sheer math. A 50% surge in caregiving demands is hitting within 5 years.
We broke down the staggering lack of individual preparation, driven by a deep psychological aversion to confronting mortality and the overwhelming structural reality of retrofitting our homes and lives.
We explored the hidden economics, that average $640 monthly out-of-pocket drain, and the destructive ways families plan to finance it, from sibling conflict to second mortgages.
We also looked at the looming collision in the corporate world and the devastating emotional burnout that is actively breaking 3/4 of the people currently doing the work.
And of course, the terrifying symptom of all this, The 2.7 million people planning to opt out, mistakenly believing a tapped-out hospital system will catch their loved ones.
But the path forward, the lifeline, is found by looking beyond the isolated nuclear family and the slow-moving state.
By shifting our focus to intentional, granular community support, neighborhood networks, faith groups, and people actively choosing to step into the mess and carry each other's burdens, we can create a sustainable way to survive the wave.
And as we consider that future, I want to leave you with a final, highly provocative thought to mull over. It builds on the data we've discussed that projects it forward.
Oh, I'm intrigued. What is it?
If those 2.7 million people follow through and opt out, and the healthcare system inevitably fails to absorb the influx because it simply lacks the funding and staff, what actually happens next?
You mean legally or structurally?
Both. We might be on the absolute verge of a radical, forced redefinition of what family and obligation mean in modern society.
Okay, how so?
Well, if families refuse to provide care voluntarily, and the state goes bankrupt trying to do it, will we see the aggressive enforcement of filial responsibility laws?
For those who haven't heard of that concept, can you explain what a filial responsibility law actually is?
They are actual laws currently on the books in various jurisdictions that legally allow the state or private nursing homes to sue adult children for the unpaid medical and housing bills of their aging parents.
Wow.
They are rarely enforced right now because of the optics. But what happens when a province or a state is facing financial ruin? Will the law suddenly step in and literally compel care or financial restitution from adult children?
Oh, wow. Legally mandated financial caregiving. The generational outrage that would spark is unimaginable. It would pit parents and children against each other in court.
Or, conversely, will we see society organically adapt by entirely abandoning the traditional nuclear family model?
Like communal living.
Exactly. If the biological family tree buckles under the weight of care, will we see a massive cultural shift toward co-housing arrangements?
That makes a lot of sense.
Picture intergenerational co-ops or multiple seniors pooling their resources to buy large properties, harboring collective private care entirely outside the traditional family structure.
The wave is coming, and it is going to forcibly reshape the geography of how we live, who we live with, and who we are responsible for.
It really makes you realize that the old, highly individualized models of surviving adulthood just aren't going to hold up against this demographic reality.
That clean, precise medical x-ray of how life is supposed to work, it is broken.
Broken.
The landscape of aging and chronic illness is murky. It is wildly complex, and it is going to require a completely new communal way of looking out for each other.
It really will.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. As you go about your week, take a moment to really look at the people around you.
Pay attention to the blind spots.
Exactly. Think about the quiet, exhausted caregivers in your own life, the ones who might be sitting right in your blind spot. What small, tangible act of community, maybe a text message, dropping off a meal, offering an hour of your time to sit in the living room, might you be able to provide for them today?
It might just be the exact intervention that keeps them from walking away.
Spot on. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.